This is the Week 6 lecture. During much of this course, we've been talking about how interoperability relates to the future. There's been a lot of discussion about state-of-the-art technological tools and what the role of those are in contemporary emergency management. However, this week we are going to move into the exact opposite direction. We're going to look at what we can or should be doing when none of that works. But first, let's take a look at how these things can even happen. For many of you, I recognize, based on your discussion posts, that a break from techno-speak is a welcome relief. However, I'm hopeful you have a better grasp on the fact that the consequence of losing access to technology has a much greater impact than it did 50, 25, or even 10 years ago. In the assigned reading for this week, you will see how the loss of technology, namely electricity, telephone, and the internet, presented a clear and present danger during the Northeast blackout in 2003 and Hurricane Katrina in 2005. If you haven't already considered it, you will see how, in today's world, a disaster that takes away power does much more than inconvenience our lives. It can increase health risks for those with compromised medical conditions. It affects the ability to pump clean water. How much clean water does your family have at their disposal right now? It disables cash registers, so people cannot purchase emergency supplies if they operate only with a debit or credit card. How much actual cash do you keep on hand? Without these tools, emergency management personnel may not be able to disperse health advisories or press releases. This, of course, means then that they cannot get life-saving information to the people who need it most. How can all this happen? Well, here are a few important concepts to be familiar with. The first is optimization. And optimization is the process of designing something to operate as effectively and with the greatest functionality possible. In fact, the more optimized something, or for that matter, some process is, the closer it is to being quote-unquote perfect. In other words, it becomes more streamlined and less reliant on other things or systems. So, sounds pretty good, huh? However, the greater the optimization, the greater the vulnerability. Here are a couple examples to illustrate the point. Say you own a business and you need someone to open the doors in the morning, someone to work the afternoon shift, and someone to work as security through the night. After paying the wages of 3 employees for a few months, you actually find just the right person that has the skills and the desire to do all 3. Voila! You have optimized your workforce by identifying a single employee that is more effective and provides greater functionality than the others did individually. However, you have also increased your vulnerability. The first day the new employee is sick from working for you 24 hours a day, you slave driver, you have lost all of your effectiveness and functionality. Second, apply that concept to our networked, Internet of Things world, and you can see how this gets exponentially problematic as systems become more optimized. We lose redundancy in things like banking or air travel or health and safety processes because, frankly, it just costs more money. Eliminating redundancies is the efficient way to do business. Well, until it's not. We all want to pay the least amount possible, and companies want to maximize profits, so we continue to find new and better ways to optimize. And I'm not suggesting that optimization is bad on its face, but understand that as time passes, our vulnerability increases. The next 2 terms, normal accidents and cascading effect, are closely related. Charles Perrow authored a book entitled, right there, Normal Accidents. He introduced a term that has become essential in understanding the genesis of many catastrophic events. It began when Perrow studied disasters from a social sciences perspective. Basically, normal accidents are an unanticipated interaction of multiple failures in a complex system. In simple terms, Perrow suggests that bad things are going to happen. People are going to goof up, and machines are going to break. In fact, the more of them, things, or people you put together, the greater the likelihood that something bad is going to happen. With increased complexity comes an increase of variables that produce more and more possibilities for unanticipated consequences. Even the exercise of adding additional layers of protection increases the complexity, therefore increasing the chances of creating a negative, high consequence event. Perot cites three conditions that add to the likelihood. They are, first, the complexity of the system, as I just described. Second, the contributing factor is the degree to which the system is what he calls tightly coupled. So the more tightly coupled the system is, or the more interdependent it is. In other words, it is a system that is highly optimized. There is very little play or very little slop among the various parts of the system. Now this is interesting because the two of these almost appear contradictory. Generally, optimization reduces complexity. It streamlines. However, Perot's point is that there are highly optimized or tightly coupled systems that are still very complex. It is this combination that could set the stage for a very bad ending. And then the third factor is the system's catastrophic potential, the potential for high consequence. When the answer to, hey, what's the worst that could happen, evokes looks of terror, you know the third condition is in play. I'll demonstrate in a moment. The cascading effect. So often found in conjunction with normal accidents is the cascading effect. The cascading effect is, quote, an inevitable and sometimes unforeseen chain of events that affect a system, end quote. In other words, a rather mundane failure in a system can result ultimately, after a series of ongoing interrelated events, in a catastrophic consequence. So think of it like the old mousetrap game. In that game, an entire series of unusual tasks take place in sequence by initiating a single small act. In light of Perot's three conditions, a normal accident may take place that sets into motion a series of cascading events. It is the complexity and combination of the two principles that creates an outcome that most never saw coming. Here's one example. In 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear power generating plant fit all three of Perot's conditions. It is a highly complex system that is tightly coupled and has the ability to create a catastrophic disaster. So on March 28th of that year, a single valve in the massive, complex operation became stuck. That led to a series of unpredictable, interconnected reactions, or cascading effects, that resulted quite literally in a nuclear meltdown. That's high consequence. Among the causes for the meltdown was the fact that a single light was out that would have indicated to operators that the valve that should have been closed was stuck open. Their inability to know that single piece of information delayed the ability to appropriately respond to the crisis by hours, exponentially increasing the consequence. So the cleanup efforts went on from 1979 to 1993. More recently are the events of the Great East Japan earthquake. You've read about the event from a communications standpoint, but consider how it all began. First, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake took place off the coast of Japan, which, second, created an enormous tsunami that produced waves up to 39 meters. That's 128 feet high. The water went as far as 6 miles inland. It is unclear how high the waves that hit the plant were since their gauges were destroyed, but it is estimated that they were about 13 meters high. The plant was designed to withstand a tsunami that measured about 5.7 meters. So not even half of the size that actually did hit it. Of the 13 generators used for powering the plant, 10 were located in the basement of the facility. They were flooded and rendered useless. 2 more of them were located at about 10 meters above sea level. They, too, were incapacitated. What resulted was explosions, fires, and a nuclear meltdown. Only one generator remained in service that was at about 13 meters above sea level. That generator kept 2 of the reactors from melting down as well. Here's a simplified diagram that puts it into perspective. You can see that a single design flaw leading to a normal accident was the cause of a catastrophic outcome. After-action reviews reveal that the placement of the generators at a higher elevation could singularly have prevented a nuclear disaster that was the largest since Chernobyl. As you reflect on today's world with the eyes of an emergency manager, wouldn't you agree that, as a society, we continue to add complexity to what is already highly optimized? It's common to hear references to the ways in which our globe is increasingly interconnected. As you think through the solutions to potential crises, it is critical that you consider the consequences that come from normal accidents and cascading effects, even when, or maybe especially when, no one else is thinking about those things. Okay, so having discussed how it happens, let's look at what we can or should do when it does. This week's reading assignment covers research conducted by Diana Sun. She looks at interoperability and communication from a three-pronged approach: high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech. Let's look at some of the findings. High-tech. So she says, first beware of the techno fix. A number of you have expressed in your discussion posts how communications consistently is raised as a problem in after-action reviews. Frequently, the discussion devolves into blaming the equipment or expressing the need to get newer and better technology. Sun points out to the fact that not only is there no technological communications panacea, the very things we think are going to bail us out may not be available at all. We may find ourselves completely unprepared, the last place an emergency manager wants to be. Techno fixes should be a tool, but certainly not the only tool. An example of a techno fix is the use of what is known as cell on wheels, or a cow. These provide localized cellular capabilities. The limitation is that if you didn't have access to cell phone service before that was wheeled in, who is going to answer you on the other end of that call? Ironically, another lesson learned was that technology does need to be one of the tools. In some cases, social media and text messaging actually works when making phone calls will not. Some of those technologies require a smaller capacity than voice traffic, so you might actually be able to get a text out where under those same circumstances you would not be able to place a call. So unlike a cow, emergency managers and citizens alike may find ways to access power in creative ways. It is likely that a citizen with access to power may not be able to run electricity to their house, but they are able to find some way to at least keep their cell phones charged and things like that. Low-tech. As it relates to low-tech solutions, there needs to be a way to get extremely localized information to people. They need to know where to get relief supplies such as food and water, and how to get in contact with family and friends. It stands to reason that the more dire the circumstances, the greater the need for practical information for daily living. This is especially true in light of the fact that Americans overestimate their level of preparedness. A poll conducted in 2012 revealed that fewer than 47% of Americans have a 3-day supply of water and non-perishable food on hand. Yet, the same group believes on average they could survive in their homes for 16 days. By my math, that would be one heck of a weight loss program. This illustrates the point that there would be a significant need for emergency managers to find a way to effectively communicate how to solve those problems in a low-tech environment. One solution is the use of what's known as a hyper-local radio. These are radio stations that serve a smaller localized base. It is not helpful to have access to a radio station that provides updates as to the state of a crisis on a statewide level. People need to know where they can go to survive, so they need that really local information. An extremely localized radio station could fill that void, but they are not as common as they once were. They're viewed as, boring, and as such, they don't get funding. A third solution is the use of a ham radio. They can be useful in emergencies as well, but their limitation is that they are primarily a point-to-point communication. They're not a good method for communicating to mass audiences. And then there is the no-tech solution. When there is absolutely no technology available, emergency managers really have to be creative. It may be that the only way to communicate is by face-to-face contact, or the delivery of handwritten notes, or the posting of signs. Ugh, that just seems crazy in today's world. In these cases, the goal is the same, to get life safety information to the people that need it most. To accomplish that, emergency managers will need to know where people naturally gather. So, for examples, maybe corner stores or evacuation centers and gas stations. And Sun notes that the key to success in this environment is flexibility. Not that we needed Congress to tell us, but they authored a report on the response to Hurricane Katrina and concluded that all levels of government lacked, quote, flexibility and adaptability, end quote. Go figure. The good news, though, is that you all know better and are going to change that for everybody the next time around.